In the 1970s, black gold began pouring from the North Sea, and Scotland was told it had hit the jackpot. Economists predicted unimaginable wealth. Some even said it could outpace Switzerland. Just across the water, Norway quietly built the largest sovereign wealth fund on Earth. Today, they're swimming in oil riches. Scotland? Still asking where the money went. If the oil was Scottish, why did Westminster keep the cheque? And how did Norway turn the same sea into a $1 trillion safety net, while Scotland watched from the sidelines? This is the story of the billion-dollar oil wealth Scotland was promised, but never got. Before the first barrel surfaced, Scotland's northeast shoreline was famous for fishing, not fuel. That changed on the 7th of October 1970, when BP's Seaquest rig cracked open the Forties field, 110 miles off Aberdeen, sending crude oil hissing 30 meters up the flare tower. In 1975, engineers predicted Scotland's oil fields would produce 400,000 barrels per day, according to BP records. But the real shock came in April 1974, when government economist Gavin McCrone wrote a secret memo, warning that independent Scotland could run a chronic surplus to an embarrassing degree from oil revenues alone. The memo was buried, but the implications weren't lost on the Scottish National Party. That same year, the SNP launched its It's Scotland Oil campaign, tuning public frustration into political momentum. In the October general election, they jumped from 1 seat to 11. Around the same time, a Scottish office report projected at least £800 million in annual oil revenue, more than the country spent on all its schools in 1974. For many, this wasn't just about economics. It was proof that Scotland had the resources to stand on its own. Editors compared the coming windfall to the Gulf states, and pubs from Inverness to Leith buzzed with talk of debt-free mortgages and tax-free wages. It wasn't just a dream, it was geography. Nearly 90% of Britain's proven reserves sat directly off Scotland's northeastern coast. Aberdeen's airport became Europe's busiest heliport overnight, and Shetland's Sullom Voe terminal rose from peat between croft houses. Hotel lobbies filled with Texan drawls and Norwegian accents, contractors doubled room rates, yet still turned guests away. By 1976, Scotland hosted 18,000 offshore workers, more than its entire fishing fleet. The Glasgow Herald called the boom the Klondike in cold water. Ordinary families bought into oil companies the way earlier generations bought homes, a ticket out of decline, a piece of the new prosperity. Council leaders issued brochures touting science parks along the Clyde and Murray coasts. Within classrooms, teachers scraped bake sales and asked whether fresh chemistry labs might be funded by royalties. Even church bulletins printed charts of projected output, proof that the boom had seeped into every corner of civic life. The legend had said, oil would rewrite Scotland's future. The only doubt, whispered on late-night radio, was how long London would hold the tap. Oil had barely reached shore when Westminster opened its own valve. Petroleum revenue tax, royalties and the supplementary charge channeled more than half of offshore profits to the Exchequer. The Office for Budget Responsibility says receipts jumped from nothing in 1975 to £12 billion in 1984 to 85, 3.1% of UK GDP. In the mid-80s, 10% of Treasury income came from Scotland's seabed, according to the Guardian analysis. Instead of saving the windfall, Whitehall had funded tax cuts, covered unemployment benefits, and underwrote privatisation discounts. North Sea cash also propped up sterling, masking a trade gap. Inside Scotland, the sums felt absurd. By 1984, the Forties, Brent, and Piperfields pumped 2 million barrels a day. Yet Aberdeen's council patched roads with emergency grants. A 1985 survey showed the median wage in Grampians 6% below the UK average. Despite derricks on the horizon, economists called it leakage, profits and skilled salaries flowing south or overseas. The contrast with Norway stung. Oslo kept at least 50% equity in each license, and in 1990 funneled surplus taxes into a sovereign fund now valued at 18.5 trillion kroner. Scotland, tied to a unitary fiscal system, watched the idea of its own fund die in committee rooms. Internal Treasury memos at the time argued that such a fund would interfere with monetary flexibility, a claim later disputed by economists. For decades, oil flowed steadily, but so did the revenue, largely south. SNP firebrand Margot MacDonald warned that Scots were watching our oil bankroll Canary Wharf espresso bars. While rigs lit the northern night like floating cities, community halls from Wick to Ullapool held raffles to buy hospital scanners. Now, ride the Stavanger ferry at dusk and you see two skylines, pine-framed fjords and jack-up rigs glowing like floating cathedrals. Norway discovered Ekofisk in 1969, only months before Britain found Forties, yet it tore up the usual extraction script. Parliament's 10 Oil Commandments of 1971 demanded a majority state ownership, deliberate pacing, and strict accounting. Surplus taxes flowed first into a simple bank account, then in 1996 into the Government Pension Fund Global. By the 31st of March 2025, that single fund holds 18,526 billion kroner, about 1.74 trillion US dollars. Norges Bank confirms. Break it down, and every Norwegian has an indirect stake worth roughly $330,000. Annual earnings now cover around a fifth of the national budget, financing free universities, high-speed rail links, and a broadband network that reaches Arctic villages. The money is scattered across 11,000 companies on every continent, plus wind farms in Texas and solar farms in Rajasthan. When oil prices nosedived in 2015, the fund still booked gains because stocks climbed. Britain took another road. The UK has collected close to £200 billion in North Sea taxes since 1975, yet never created a national savings vehicle. Chancellors from Dennis Healey to Rishi Sunak spent revenues as ordinary income. Researchers at Aberdeen University calculate that saving even half, invested Norway style since 1980, would now exceed £800 billion, enough to grant every Scot a life-changing start in adulthood. Tiny Shetland proves the concept works locally. The islands negotiated a levy on each barrel unloaded at Solomon Voe and invested the proceeds. The fund stood at about £389 million in March 2024. Ferry fares are subsidised, and every secondary school owns 3D printers. Norway did not discover better oil, it discovered better rules, and crucially, it had the political will to apply them, early, aggressively, and without apology. Across the North Sea, the blueprint sat in plain sight. Scotland knew the combination, yet the vault door never opened. Scotland finally gained its own parliament in 1999, yet by then the oil tide was ebbing. Production, which peaked at 2.7 million barrels per day in 1999, had slipped to barely 1 million by 2011, according to Department for Energy Records. Government statistics show North Sea receipts plunging from £10.6 billion in 2008 to 2009 to only £500 million in 2020 to 2021. Even with a devolved parliament, Holyrood remains locked out. Offshore taxation was Westminster's domain, and Westminster kept the keys. A decade of debate on fiscal autonomy reopened, this time with fewer billions on the table. Then came Russia's invasion of Ukraine and a global energy shock. Prices spiked above $100, pulling Treasury receipts back to £9 billion in 2022 to 23. Westminster replied with the Energy Profits Levy, a windfall tax now extended to 2029. Industry groups warned that the move could cut £12 billion from future receipts and accelerate closures. For Scottish communities, the rollercoaster felt familiar. Peterhead Harbour bustled again with supply vessels, but hotels hesitated to hire staff, unsure of how long the boom would last. Offshore engineers received signing bonuses, while graduates struggled to find internships once prices drifted below $80. At street level, that means profits arrive in spikes. Public services arrive in slow drips. On top of market swings came the climate reckoning. The UK pledges net zero by 2050, and campaigners warn continued drilling risks stranded assets. Decommissioning costs are forecast at £40 billion, half rebated by the Treasury, pushing another $20 billion onto taxpayers. In effect, money that could have grown in a sovereign fund will instead dismantle the rigs that once earned it. Amid the volatility, Holyrood must plan for a future in which oil cash is noisy but brief. Meanwhile, offshore wind turbines taller than London Shard now ring the Moray Firth, their blades sweeping in an area bigger than Edinburgh city centre. ScotWind auctions in 2022 granted leases able to produce 28 gigawatts. enough to power every Scottish home 3 times over, according to Crown Estate Scotland. The upfront option fees alone sent £700 million to Holyrood. For the first time, a resource check arrived in Edinburgh other than London, and the applause echoed across Parliament Square. Investors see potential beyond electricity. Green hydrogen hubs at Cromarty, St Fergus, and Grangemouth plan to use surplus wind to split seawater, creating export fuel for the same tankers once reserved for crude. Analyst Wood Mackenzie forecasts Europe's hydrogen demand will reach 500 terawatt-hours by 2040, a market worth hundreds of billions. Scottish ports are already dredging channels to welcome the carriers, yet history whispers caution. Without a permanent saving system, a new revenue tide might again drift into day-to-day budgets. Economist Jim Cuthbert argues that receipts from ScotWind and future carbon storage licenses should enter a sovereign trust shielded from yearly spending fight. The blueprint copies Norway: invest across the globe, spend only the return, and keep politicians out of the vault. Holyrood must also decide how to share gains with communities that view turbines from their kitchen windows. Shetland proved it's not about the size of the field, but the foresight of the deal. Campaigners in Orkney and the Western Isles want a fixed slice of offshore wind income to underwrite ferries, care homes, and fibre links. If lawmakers agree, the energy transition could align national coffers with island living rooms. Geology has offered Scotland a second chance. This well never runs dry, but public patience might. Capture it wisely, and the next generation may finally receive the wealth Scotland was once promised, but never got. Was Scotland robbed of its oil fortune, or did it miss the moment to claim it? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you found this story compelling, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden forces shaping countries and economies.